Welcome to Better Relationships, Better Work, where we explore how to make work better through the power of relationships. My name is Jason Lauritsen. I'm the author of 2 books, a leadership trainer, and speaker on a mission to fix how we treat people at work. Now, in this episode, we explore the practice of radical acceptance. What does it look like to fully embrace others as they are? Celebrating the things that make us different rather than letting those things divide us. And we talk about the importance of radical acceptance, not just in one-on-one or personal relationships, but also in effective leadership teams. And we learn that radical acceptance in leadership teams starts with radical clarity. And in this conversation, we get into a really important distinction between judgment and discernment within a team. This is some really powerful stuff. Now, my guest this week is Tegan Trovato. Tegan is the founder and CEO of Bright Arrow Coaching. She's an executive and leadership team coach with over 2 decades of experience in talent development and executive coaching. She's also the host of the Life and Leadership podcast, which I'd highly recommend you check out. You might just find an episode over there with someone you will recognize. That's me. Tegan is my go-to resource for clear thinking and sound advice on executive leadership, and she shares some great perspectives and insights in this episode. So please enjoy my conversation with Tegan Trovato. Tegan, thanks for being here with me.
Thanks for having me, Jason.
So before we dive into this exploration of relationships, I want to start by throwing a few questions at you just to let us get to know you a little bit and kind of how maybe you think about relationships.
Sure.
And I'm going to start with my favorite question, or one of my new favorite questions, which is, tell us something that you learned about relationships growing up that still shapes how you think about or show up in relationships today.
Oh, I have two big and sort of opposite feeling answers for you on this one. So the first one that comes up for me is that I remember back to being a young kid and how easy it was to like people. I just remember, I remember being on the playground and just loving like some kid I met and wanting to just run and be free together and want them to be our, for us to be best friends, like way, way back. And what I learned from that still applies today is that can sometimes still be the easy part. And but adult relationships require so much more nurturing after that first part of the bliss, and not just in a romantic sense, but even in a friendship way. We can really find folks we like and vibe with, but then it takes a little more work than it used to when we were children. But I think there's a signal when you're at that first part of a relationship and you're really into somebody, and whether it's work or personal or romantic, there's just such a delicious part of relationship formation, those early stages of attraction and interest in each other. But then we can't forget to really tend to it, to keep that alive. The other thing that comes up for me, which is sort of on the sadder side of the relationship spectrum, which is I learned from my mother growing up. My mom, for many people listening who've ever met me or heard my personal story, and Jason, you know this, just suffered tremendously with emotional dishealth and some mental health challenges over her lifetime. And one of the things I learned by being in relationship with her is that it is deeply our responsibility to be healthy, each of us. And that when we find ourselves in relationship with someone who is not taking responsibility after feedback, after being offered resources, just cannot tend to their own health, we don't have to stay in that relationship. It is okay and appropriate to exit, especially if someone, because of their unhealth, is abusive in that relationship. And there was a time, Jason, where I really questioned if I should be sharing this part of my story with folks because, I chose to exit the relationship with my mother, which makes people want to fall out of their chairs because it's such a horrific thought for most people, understandably. But I once shared this in a room when I was giving a talk, and I had 2 different people who did not know each other come up to me afterwards and just say, thank you, because I have been suffering in a relationship with a parent who is abusive to me as an adult. And I needed someone to show me what it looked like to just stand up and be well. And so I've decided ever since then that when it felt right, I would share this part of my story. So summary is, when we're in relationship, if the person we're in relationship with isn't tending to their own health and it is unhealthy for us, if we've done the work we can with them and there's a limitation on that, it's okay to be out.
And I love the complexity of the contrast of those two lessons because
Yeah. Life
the one
is
thing
just like that.
yeah, I mean humans, right?
Yeah.
Humans are complicated. That's what makes all of this complicated is as you were talking about the easy. That's interesting, how easy it is to like people as a kid. The other thing that with that, as you said that, I also was like, that triggered for me to think it's also so easy to accept others, right? You know what I mean? Like if you walked up to somebody as a 5-year-old and said, "Hey, can I play with you?" Most kids are like, "Sure." And like immediately you're in this group and all of a sudden, like 10 minutes later, you couldn't tell that these kids weren't, that we weren't best friends or whatever.
Right.
And there's really interest, like it's easy to like people. It's easy to accept people. And I think about how complicated that gets for us. Like I think as we get older, it might still be easy to like people, but I think there's so much more judgment involved before, like, do I really want to be friends? I mean, before we even
Absolutely.
have a conversation. And then on the other hand, though, once we're into a relationship, we find it so difficult to get back out or to set boundaries or to not lose ourselves in it. So it's really like, this is really hard stuff.
Yeah,
So
it is. It can be. Yeah. Yeah, of course.
So let's peel back a layer. This is kind of just another, I guess, curiosity question. When you think about your closest friendships, what is the value or the quality that you value most in a friend?
Single-handedly, the top thing is their ability to give me insight. Meaning, what can you see about my life or work that I can't see? And the reason I find that particularly valuable is that is literally what I do for a job. Right? Like as an executive coach and a founder of a firm is to look for patterns and themes in people's lives and work and hold up the mirror and say, "Hey, can you see this thing here that's happening around you? What do you want to do with it?" And so because I then naturally am very introspective in my own life in the same way, when I feel stuck or maybe I don't feel stuck, but someone around me can just say, "Hey, do you see this thing that keeps happening in your life or in your relationships or at work?" It blows me away and it takes my breath away from a place of real gratitude because I'm as hungry for that as the next person. So for the closest friendships in my life are the ones who can do that with me or for me, especially when I need it and am asking for it. So yeah.
That is that's super interesting. Thank you for sharing that. That's I've been asking this question, over the course of doing these conversations, and I'm surprised constantly by just the diversity of the things that we value and how unique it is to each one of us and the relationships we form. It's just another reminder that humans are, we're really interesting, diverse creatures. Like we're all different. So,
well, and to
awesome.
that point, Jason, how rich relationship is that there can be that many answers.
Yeah.
Beautiful thing.
It is. It is indeed. So I do want to ask one sort of work question because before we dive into the exploration of your relationships that we're going to do here in a minute, I was thinking about this conversation and just a curiosity popped up for me because you work with executive teams and through your work as a coach, you mentioned here a second ago, you're working with executive teams and large organizations. And I have sat on executive teams, been a part of these groups, and they are really weird, oftentimes networks of relationships, some functional, some dysfunctional, whatever. And so I was curious because this conversation's about relationships and that relationships power highly effective teams. At least I think you would agree with that.
Totally.
So I'm curious what you see as the most common gap or common skill set in relationship? Like what relational skill or relationship skill is most commonly missing in executive teams that's really holding them back?
I'm going to have two that I'll share here. And what I want to point out before I even give my answer is that in my experience, what is missing in the executive suite and on senior leadership teams is the same thing that is often missing in our interpersonal relationships outside of work. So anyone listening to this answer can put both their ears on and listen for where this applies across their lives, because it's true in my personal experience in my own life, and then also with all these execs. So I think the first thing that's missing is something you and I have touched on before, which is just radical acceptance of the other people on the team. We should not look or sound the same, and we shouldn't think the same. And the only, the thing we should strive to have in common on a team is our purpose and what we need to deliver together. But how we get there and the style with which we do it and the solutions we come up with should be different if we're doing it right. But what is missing is that we become calloused over many years of work where it's like, to be safe, I have to be right. And to be good at this, my ideas have to be the ones that are chosen, et cetera. You get the line of thinking. Really healthy teams who are just in beautiful relationship together are like, oh my God, I would have never thought of that. Let's play with your idea. Or I loved my idea until I heard yours. Talk about being really healthy, right? So I'm using this idea generation as an example of what it looks like to just be radically accepting. And so I think that is certainly sorely missing, and it blinds us so much to what's really happening around us. And it makes us small. It makes us autonomous and individual when we can't be radically accepting of others and work more in relationships. So I think that's one. The other is that we stop nurturing the relationships. So we get into relationship and we become transactors. And I think that we fail to continuously treat each relationship, whether it's interdependent in the team or collectively as a team, like its own entity or microcosm, and to really ask what it needs. So if you think of each relationship like its own flower pot, you have to nurture it or it dies. And transacting will kill a relationship. It will kill you in a way emotionally, because it's not very fulfilling. It's not how we are wired. So I think that, and trust me, my gosh, with the speed of things and the volatility of things in corporate America, the first thing to go is the slowdown to tend to relationship. And so a lot of times by the time we get in with an executive team or a leadership team, and we suggest a long, slow dinner or a boat ride before we kick off the work, people are just like, oh my God, can I afford an hour? Can I afford 2 hours? And then they get on the boat or they get to the dinner and they're like, hey, since I couldn't catch you last week, I want to tell you all the stuff about work that I meant to get on your calendar for. And it's like, no. Nope. Who are the humans at this table? Why do they get out of bed every morning? What do you have in common? What do you not have in common that's cool? What do your children do? What are your pets into? Let's calm down and get to know each other again. And we will set that intention. Like, we'll be really clear that's what we're here to do. Let's not talk about work until the workshop the next day. And people are so relieved to just be given that instruction and permission. And they come into the room like with energy again. So, but then we get right back into the grind if we are not intentional about nurturing. So I think those are the two biggest things that I commonly see missing as sort of whether relationship skills or habits with senior leaders.
It strikes me, and you teed this up, but it strikes me as you said that I mean, we could have been like, if you could replace executive teams with marriage and or whatever relationships, and the same thing, radical acceptance and nurturing the relationship are two things that are vitally important and often missing and lead to all of the issues that we tend to have. And I think the counterintuitive thing that you're suggesting, and that's why I love this work, is that if you will slow down and invest in these things, learn how to do these, there's an incredible payoff in terms of efficiency and creativity and productivity that actually just comes out of the fact that now you have greater trust and greater
Yes.
connection and a greater ability to work together and
Yes.
collaborate and all these things. So it's a counterintuitive thing. You have to slow down to go fast, and there's no shortcut on relationships, right? Takes time.
Yes. And you know what came up for me when you said that, Jason, is, as an executive coaching firm, CEOs come to us all the time and they're like, what's the output of us relationshiping better? Or what's the output of us having clarity? And, we're always talking about the business results that they desire to achieve. And what is striking to me as you and I are sitting here is, what if we chose to relationship at work because it feels good? I mean, we don't talk about desire and we don't talk about pleasure at work, and for all kinds of obvious reasons. But man, if we could get back in touch with our desire to be in friendship, with our attraction for and our pleasure to be in something that's comfortable and healthy for us as we do the work, what if that could just be enough? It's so funny that that's not enough of an excuse to just do relationship wells because it feels nice for us. It has to have a business purpose attached to it. And I would really challenge that. I mean, I'm all about an ROI. I run a business too. I'm all about it. But, at the end of the day, I am also very connected with my own desire and my interest in pleasure as I go about my day. And so relationships do that for us when they're healthy and tended to. And yes, they give us business results. Yay. But I think we can't lose sight of the fact that, our own human bodies and psyches are driving us to relationship because it is what is good for us. And it is why when we are doing what's good for us, then we get the business results, right? But we switch that up a lot of times in our corporate equations. And I think we're missing the forest for the trees.
I think it's my suspicion would be that it's hard. I think the reason it's hard for us to convince executives of the merits of, if you invest in these things at a team level, that the results will come. It's sort of like a field of dreams thing. And it truly is a field of dreams kind of situation because they've never seen it. They've never experienced it, right? It's always been the Hunger Games or Lord of the Flies or whatever, right? That's corporate is designed around fostering competition, and you are getting promoted at the expense of your peers and other things. And so I think because of that, it doesn't even make any sense. Like what would that even look like? They've never been a part of it. They don't know what it would look like or feel like, and oftentimes they've also, by the way, they've also thrown their personal relationships in the ditch as they're climbing up the corporate ladder, right, in pursuit of greater power and esteem and money and a bigger office and all the things. And so they don't have the personal relationships at home to lean. I mean, so like, where's the model, right? That's always the thing that I think we shouldn't be surprised. And you hinted at this earlier. We shouldn't be surprised that we have relational challenges at work because we have relational challenges everywhere.
Yes.
And so, we don't magically learn how to be in great relationships suddenly at work if we've never been modeled that in our lives anywhere else.
We don't. And, that's why I'm so passionate about what we end up being able to do inside of organizations. I mean, our value proposition is business results if you team well and relationship well. And science has shown us that at work, relationships aren't formed by doing a communication course or focusing only on relationship as your goal. The relationships are formed by delivering together and having this fabric that you have to interact in. So work is a really great place for us to relationship well because we have so many shared goals. And that is part of what we get to do is model what that good relationship looks like. So heck, yes, you just hit the nail on the head, or to model what it looks like to repair with someone when we don't do well, or to model what it looks like to give high praise without ego, right? So we do need to see this done, especially when you are on a team that's been doing things together for a long time the same way. It's really hard to just really break out or step out of a pattern. So,
indeed. Well, let's see if we can find some insights by digging into a couple of relationships from your life. I know you, as listeners know, so what we do in this conversation is we dive into a couple relationships, a personal and a work in your life, to see what's working and why it works, and see if we can't learn something from that then we can pull into our own lives and work to make things work better for us. So
Yeah.
let's start with the personal relationship. I prepped you to think about this in advance. So what relationship are we going to talk about today?
We're going to talk about one of my longest running relationships with my best friend, Liz. We've been friends for almost 20 years, and we met through work. Hi, the place where many friendships are born. So yeah, she's the one I thought quite a bit about coming into this podcast today.
So she kind of checks the box actually for both of these, both the personal and the work relationship, which I think increasingly is the case for a lot of us. So
yeah.
So tell me a little bit about your relationship with Liz. What makes it such a strong, healthy relationship?
What makes it strong? Well, how I would characterize it, first of all, is it's one of those friendships where we don't live in the same place, and we haven't for half of our friendship. But it's one of those friendships where we would drop anything for each other, like anything, fly across the country, be there in 10 minutes, whatever, maybe not 10 minutes across the country, but you get the picture. That's so rare and wonderful. And it sort of allows me, and I would hope the same for her, to walk the planet with a little more comfort, to know that there is more than, one person out there, hopefully, that would just drop anything for me if I was having a hard time, or if I just really needed someone. And what makes that work is that there is, for us, because we're wired in ways where we like the truth. We don't like it sugar-coated. We're radical truth tellers for each other, but rooted in real love and care. So it's not like we drop all of the social norms and just hand it to each other. But, this is someone I could call and be like, okay, Liz, you know me. Tell me what I don't see here. Or to say, what would you do? What would you do here? And because we have enough values alignment. So I think that's another reason that this works. We have some really great values alignment in our lives. What would you do here? And to imagine if I tried that on, what that might be like. And for there to be enough trust and love that we don't live our lives the same way. We don't take each other's advice all the time. And that's healthy and it's perfect. Yeah. So I don't know what else you might like to know there, but it's just one of those rare things. Oh, the other thing is we've kind of ebbed and flowed some years. And, I have friends who've been married for decades. They would certainly describe their marriage the same way. I guess after 20 years of friendship, that makes sense too, that there have been some years where it's like, oh my gosh, texting and calling almost every day. And then there were some years where it's like a check-in once a month with a text, like, are you out there? Hope you're well, like just kind of informal. And that's so interesting, but the intimacy never died. And the care never died. And even during those years where we may have months of not really being very intimate conversation, that she still would get on a plane for me if I needed her. And that never was a question.
Sounds like an awesome relationship. I think that's the kind of relationship probably we all crave in our lives, more of anyways. How do you think, as you think about that relationship developing over time, ending up, like, you don't end up in a place like this with your, ride or die kind of person that will always be there. That doesn't happen overnight. So I'm curious, if you think back about the relationship, how did you get there? What things happened to reveal or allow this relationship to kind of take root? Do you remember are there specific things that you can point to?
Yeah. I think about where we met at work was a really hard job. And we actually didn't work together all that long, but hard stuff will either connect you or split you. I don't think there's a lot of middle ground. And our hard stuff connected us. So early on, we had some really tough times at work. And then over years, we both lost parents who passed. And, that's a big deal. It's a big milestone in most lives. The mortality of our parents is just like a certain kind of grief. And we were both there for that in each other's lives, marriages, divorce, children being born. I mean, so all of those things, while some of them carry joy, everything, even with joy, carries a little grief. And so I think we really had opportunities in our life milestones together to bond in really tender ways. The other thing that came up for me is that even though it was hard in that job when we first met, I do reflect on Liz and I having that childlike connection from the playground. Like when we opened and we were talking about, reflecting on what we learned in childhood. Gosh, I think back to when we met, she and I would just laugh and play. We had just a real playful, we still do have a really playful relationship. And I think that we took care of that. That's still very much part of our thread that we pull through our relationship, that we still are kind of silly sometimes and like to have fun. And I think that's part of what we did over the years to keep things nurtured.
And it's funny how, and as you're saying hard, I'm going to say, I think the other type of workplace that creates this kind of opportunity is dysfunctional workplaces, which is where one of my longtime friends, that's where it was born through survival of the dysfunction. Mm-hmm. And it is kind of like the playground, right? Where you're in the playground and everything feels hard or awkward or whatever, and you're just scanning for someone who you can ask to play, right? And that there's that connective piece that once you find that person, then it's like, okay, we can do this. We can actually survive this now because we're together, and navigate that. So that's really interesting. I guess the gift of hard / dysfunctional / whatever we want to call it, work experiences is hopefully relationships that are born out of it. This webcast is sponsored by my longtime friends at Inspiring Workplaces. Now, if you are someone who's working to create an engaging and inspiring workplace for your employees, and of course you are, that's why you're here, then listen up. Inspiring Workplaces is a global community of tens of thousands of HR and employee experience professionals that you can join for free. As a member, you will gain access to thousands of articles and videos and podcasts and events that will help you change the world by changing the world of work. They are also home to the Inspiring Workplaces Awards that recognize the best workplaces in the world. You can learn about the application process at their website. So please go visit inspiring-workplaces.com to learn more and to join the community. That's inspiring-workplaces.com. So I'm curious, as you think about your relationship with Liz over the years, are there some learnings or tips or things that you've sort of reflected on about what makes that relationship work or has sort of allowed that relationship to flourish that then you've taken and applied in other places in your life, other relationships in your life?
Yeah, the fun part is important. In the levity, like really just having a balance. Because I think we can get so serious in relationships and we're like, so, we got to do the work of the relationship. And I'm like, we got to do the play of relationship. Let's go have some fun. Like that's another thing. I think another lesson I learned in our relationship is that we are functionally quite different people. Like we think really differently. We organize our lives and orient ourselves to our lives really differently. And I find it inspiring. We don't have to be alike in so many ways for it to be good. And so I really celebrate how she's different and she celebrates how I'm different. And I've certainly brought that into, especially these newer relationships in my life as I've moved a few times and just really learned through my relationship with her to appreciate, like, man, my friend group doesn't have to look like me all the time. I'm using air quotes when I say look like, I really appreciate having folks around me who bring wildly different ways to look at the world to the table or different ways to experience life, So yeah, really grateful to our friendship for that.
Sounds to me like a callback to radical acceptance.
It is, which is a practice, It
is.
I'll share this too. This is relationship oriented. I'm sure my ex won't mind this, but because it's high praise to he and I both. We've been divorced a couple of years, and our work as our marriage was ending and continues on today. It's just to accept that we are exactly who we are. And in marriages that are struggling, they often struggle, and ours struggled for a time because of this. We want someone to be different. We need them to be someone frankly, they probably aren't. And so to just be, I think as I look at my friends who've been married for decades, I feel like one of the things I see that they do well is they're like, nope, that is just how my husband is, or that's my wife. And they're smiling like it's not their thing, or it's not necessarily what they wanted or the reaction they wanted or but there's some deeply rooted, not a box checking acceptance, deeply rooted acceptance for who this person is and how they are. And, and my ex and I work really well now as co-parents because we're there finally. And sometimes that's how you arrive at it as post-marriage. But I think that that radically accepting of others as they are is it's a practice. I'm not suggesting this from a place of I've always done it. I'm suggesting it from a place of I practice this. I don't have it mastered. And I have to catch myself as regularly as anyone else saying, okay, wait, nope, this is who they are. They don't need to be different. Who am I next to them while they're being who they are? That is relationship.
It is. And I do want to call out something. I want to get your reaction to this too, as you talk about that, because I think if you're listening to the conversation so far, it seems like there's radical acceptance. We've talked about then celebration of difference. Mm-hmm. But I think one of the things that I have found in my own experience is that radical acceptance is also sort of on the other side of radical acceptance, there's agency and freedom now to make decisions about this relationship.
Yes.
And so I think the healthy relationships and healthy divorces are both on the back of radical acceptance, but then there's a different decision that gets made. Because sometimes when there's a radical acceptance, there can be like, well, that's just who my wife is. And then there comes a point where you're either like, it's who my wife is, and I love her for it, right? She's different and unique and whatever. Or that's who my wife is, and I can no longer live in that. To your point, back with the parent a relationship that's like, this is no longer a relationship I can choose to be a part of. That happens at work. That happens in personal relationships all the time. I think we forget radical acceptance is the first step either way. It's the first step to a deeper relationship, or it's a first step to creating boundaries and maybe removing yourself. But it all starts from like a person is who a person is. And so start from there, and then you can make decisions.
I am so thankful you pulled all of that together, because I agree. And the question I often will pair with, this is who so-and-so is, and can this work for me? Right. So absolutely. Yeah. But again, in most cases, the other person doesn't have to be wrong. And that's where there comes that judgment piece of like, this is how so-and-so is. Can that work for me? No. And that, if your answer is no, this doesn't work for me, that can be it. And it can be okay. When we have options, that's a lot easier to say. But I think, when we're like, this is how so-and-so is, does that work for me? The answer is no. And then you go to a place of something's wrong with them. You've lost it. You've missed the point. Now, I'm not suggesting that if you have a toxic boss or a partner that's unhealthy, that you say, well, this is just how they are. Can this work for me? Yes. Are you really answering the question? Right. Or no. And then what? Healthy boundaries, autonomy, absolutely are part of this equation, Jason. So I'm thankful for you calling that out. So,
and it can lead to, healthy conversations too, because there are, absolutely, especially I'd say at work, when you run into that radical acceptance, okay, this is where we are. This is who this person is or how they're showing up with me. The next question is, does this work for me, or can this work for me? If it's no, then you can step into a pretty powerful conversation with that individual. And then it becomes a choice that you make together, right? Either something has to give. Not either. Something has to give. Either we're going to have to make some adjustments in our relationship and how we're showing up with one another, or probably one of us is going to exit this relationship, right? And that's okay. Either way is okay. It's just a matter of it starts though with that radical acceptance of reality.
Yeah. It does. And in that relationship or that conversation you're talking about, which can be so powerful, sounds similar to what we just talked about as an opening of like, hey, I'm observing this in you. I'm observing this reaction in me. This relationship as is not working for me. Here's what I can do. What are you willing to do? And sometimes the answer is, I'm not willing to do anything. good, you got your answer. And that is also okay. That
Yep.
can also be okay because they also have agency and autonomy. I think we end up enmeshed in our relationships a lot of times. And that's taught to us by our parents. It is fostered in us in social media and ways that we find relationships aspirational, and we lose our autonomy. So then when we try to reclaim it, we're disoriented in it because we're used to expecting someone else to fill our gaps for us. And so what you just described and what you and I just talked about was a healthy relationship with ideally two autonomous adults who borrow things from each other to make their lives better instead of requiring things from each other to feel whole. And that enmeshment happens at work. It happens in our romantic life. It happens with our parents and our siblings. I mean, it's everywhere. So if you're listening and this is not a word you're familiar with, Google it. It's so helpful to become enlightened about what relationship enmeshment looks like, the characteristics of it, the qualities of it, and then really examining your own relationships for places you may accidentally be, relationshiping that way.
Right. So I want to jump now to seeing how you combined the two relationships into one. So that's a win. I want to borrow your expertise while we have it, to kind of really pull out what it looks like when you show up with a team or a group of leaders and we need to work on radical acceptance. Right. So if I'm one of those leaders in that group and I'm maybe not demonstrating the behaviors of radical acceptance, I'm not at that place, or there's several. How do you coach a team through that? Where does that start? What are some tips that you have learned along the way of how do you cultivate that in a group of people? Because I think this is this is probably we keep coming back to this topic. So let's mine this a little bit and see if we can't give people some places to start maybe in their personal or professional lives.
Yeah. So your question is, how do we start teaching radical acceptance in teams? Yeah. I think, first of all, the reason there is a lack of acceptance in teams is because there's usually a lack of clarity about what the team is there to do. And when we don't have clarity about why we're here, and I mean crystal clarity, I mean being able to tap any executive in an elevator and say, what are the 3 things you have to deliver in 6 months and how will you know you've achieved them? If they can't all answer the question privately, they're not clear. And I would wager that 80% of organizations probably fall in the camp of not having enough clarity. So when we're not clear on what our work is, that leaves us to the things we feel we can control, which are small. And those things are typically relationship oriented. It's being right. It's, as we talked earlier, having our idea be the idea, feeling like validated in the room for our existence, because we don't have enough clarity about what it is we're headed towards. Because when we know as an executive team what it is we have to work on, that's all we do. That's what we talk about. There isn't any space for made up stuff. There isn't enough room for a power struggle. There isn't enough room for ego. It is alignment to the things we're there to win at together. And that's fun. So I think that number one, bringing a team together and getting to the work of clarity first is everything. Because then when things come up that don't align to that, we can go, why is this coming up? Right? If it doesn't align to the thing we're here to do, it's sourced in something else. What's that about? And often it comes back to an individual's needs, which also need to be tended to, but maybe not in the room with others, So it's kind of interesting. And the other thing we teach when a team has gotten aligned, so let's say step 1 is done, they're aligned and they're clear and they're ready to go win together. The thing we start to teach is the difference between judgment and discernment in a room. We need execs to have great, capability of doing both. But generically speaking, I say the difference is judgment has an emotional residue. Discernment does not. Okay, that's a Tegan Trovato original. So I don't know if you look this up, how different that'll sound. But when I'm in the room, this is what I say, right? So we want you to discern a good decision from a bad decision in your company and in your team and your organization. It doesn't have to have an emotional residue when you do it. Does that make sense?
It does. Give me an example. Because I think this is a really important idea, and I want to make sure that we clearly understand it. So, can you play out just an example of what the difference would sound like?
Yeah. So the difference would be Tommy says, I think we should do X in order to close the gap for revenue. And someone says, no, that is not a good idea because blah, blah, blah. Then we'll back up and say, if you were to make a difference between judgment or discernment, judgment has an emotional overtone, discernment does not. How was that answer? How do you think that answer came across? And immediately there's like there was a disdain, in the voice. There was there was an undertone of that idea was dumb. We all know that sound. Discernment would sound more fact-based. It would say, I don't know that I agree with that approach because of these factors. Feel the difference. And we're so tired at work a lot of times, or we feel like we've had that same conversation a million times. So it's really easy to come across as judgmental versus discerning. Judgment is usually a right or wrong. Discernment has a lot more width and, sophistication to it because it accounts for other things intellectually.
I love that. That definitely makes it very clear. And I think that happens. Right, that happens all the time in relationships. And I think I would assume that you can learn that. You can apply that little nugget even if you don't have radical clarity to have a better impact in a team, right? The emotional residue is almost always harmful unless it's a positive emotional. If I leave you feeling empowered and excited or whatever, probably that emotional residue is okay. But we're talking about the negative emotional residue that harms relationships, leads to resentments and all kinds of other things.
Yeah, and you can apply this at the personal level really well too. When I think about other relationships I'm in, like you can imagine someone says, I'm going to go do X. My kid's having a hard time. I'm going to go do X to try to help them. If something comes up in you that you're like, oh, I wouldn't do that, that's judgment. If something comes up for you and you're like, well, I wouldn't probably do that for my kid because my kid is X, that's discernment. There's nothing wrong with the person who generated the idea. It just may not work for you. Gosh, that comes back to that autonomy thing again, right? Of like, this is you, that may not work for me, and that's okay. So that can be the material feeling difference between judgment and discernment.
Awesome. So one more quick question for you.
Yeah.
Relative to back to, I think this nurturing piece is really important. And I do think it's something that gets overlooked a lot. I talk about one of the things when you said Teganisms, one Jasonism that I say all the time is that, time is the currency of relationships, and that is all about that nurturing and building requires time. But I'm curious what you have found or what you share and teach as the most effective ways. Like, how do you help people remember what it looks like to nurture relationships?
We'll just talk about it overtly because I think it can look different in every organization. Some organizations, people do eat lunch, for example. Most don't, sadly. Like most leaders are not eating lunch. If they are, they're eating it in a meeting. Like this is life these days, right? Has been for quite some time. So we look for places where there could just be a natural opportunity to share a meal, go for a walk, take a meeting while you walk. You'd be surprised how just being in our bodies can help us feel more connected. I also encourage people to do a few minutes of a check-in, especially if they only meet like weekly or every other week, to spend 10 minutes of that agenda just hearing from each person, literally around the horn, 60 seconds, some personal share about how he or she are doing, because it gives us connective tissue after the meeting to say, hey, I heard you say your son was struggling, or I heard you say your daughter is into this band, and just to make the intentional connection bid. And it doesn't go unnoticed. It's gotten so rare now that when another leader says, hey, I heard your kid is doing awesome in marching band. That is amazing. I used to play the trumpet. I mean, you won't forget that. That is good stuff. And it's not that hard, but it is an intentional thing we have to do. And because we are typically so time poor, sometimes those small things now carry so much weight, it would blow your mind. And the execs I see make those bids or put that effort forward just stand out from the crowd so hard, you wouldn't believe it. You wouldn't believe it. So we're having to work in the ratio we can. And so now the small things really make a bigger difference than they ever have.
Some really great stuff there. And I love the call to sort of use the time you have just more intentionally. I mean, use the time you're going to be with people in a more intentional way. Is that's sort of the super hack in the super busy world we live in, is like, when you do have time together, don't miss it.
Yeah.
Just don't miss it. I mean, it'd be great if you can make more time or whatever, but use the time you have more intentionally. So,
Yeah.
well, I am super grateful for your time and investment in our relationship here today and having this conversation, Tegan. I always learn so much and come away so inspired from our conversations that I am delighted to share that with others. So thank you so much for being here.
Oh, likewise. Feel very much the same, Jason. Thanks for what you're putting out into the world. We all really need it right now.
Well, we'll keep at it then. So thank you so much. We'll talk again soon.
Thank you.
Hope you enjoyed today's episode. More importantly, I hope you learned something from the episode that can help you right away. Now, if you'd like to reflect on what you can learn from your own healthy, positive relationships to make work better, I've included a link in the description below where you can access and download what I call the relationship reflection exercise. This includes the same questions that I ask each of my guests to reflect on prior to our conversation on the webcast. Also, if you found today's episode valuable, I'd ask 3 quick favors of you. Number 1, please like the episode. By liking the video and adding a comment if something spoke to you or stood out to you as really significant, you give me some great and valuable feedback, but you also help others find the video. I'd also ask you to subscribe to the channel. That does 2 important things. 1, it makes sure that you won't miss any upcoming episodes, and it sends me the message that you like the kind of content that I'm creating here. And finally, please share this video with someone who you think might benefit. What better gift can you give someone than the gift of better relationships and a better work experience? I'm really grateful that you were here today, and I look forward to seeing you next time.